Ladies and gentlemen, my friends, fellow humans, compatriots from across the planet, I am Nikhil Parekh. In this video, I shall be speaking about my book titled Life Equal to Death, Volume 2, Poems on Life, Death, as well as giving you a recitation of different poems from this book of mine. So friends, let me commence with an introduction to this book of mine about the poetry book. This book, which has 50 differently titled poems, is actually volume 2 of the book titled Life Equal to Death, Poems on Life, Death, 1200 pages. This enigmatic collection of poems explores and equates the boundless possibilities of life and death and delves. This enigmatic collection of poems explores and equates the boundless possibilities of life and death and delves into each intricate inexplicability of survival. Parekh's roving philosophical eye brings the unconquerable richness of life to the fore and yet at the same time explicitly highlights the veracity of death as the absolute certainty of every existence. The poet joyously celebrates the occasions of both life and death with equal panache. In each poetic stanza, sewn with the uncanny mysteries of this universe. The poems within immortalize both life and death as the ultimate victories and the two most contrastingly amazing and divine sides of creation, catapulting the reader to the threshold of ultimate ecstasy. They bring about an impromptu twist with the closure of breath and what lies beyond. This charismatically woven collection of poetic verse would equally enamor the narcissist as well as the simple humanitarian to the core. This book is a humble attempt to enlighten the readers with the equality of life and death and to live in both of them to the most unparalleled fullest. Embracing only the religion of humanity as the Lord has commanded, every living being on earth. You can't die in life and can't live in death. Each of these components are irrefutably equal in every respect and should be worshipped with due obeisance. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall now give you a recitation of 4 different poems from this book of mine. These poems are titled as Destined to be Dead When God Wants, Destined to be Dead When God Wants, Life is as omnipotent as God, Never live in death, never die in life, and Life's the way you see it. Of course, at any juncture of victoriously mesmerizing existence, you can purchase this book of mine from Amazon.com. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall now give you a recitation of my poem titled Destined to be Dead When God Wants. So here is a recitation of my poem titled Destined to be Dead When God Wants. I didn't know whether it would be flamboyantly optimistic rays of the sun, or whether the sky would resemble silver streaks of monsoon grey when I would step out of the pitch dark coal mine. I didn't know whether it would rain unrelentingly or whether it would turn out to be a day embellished with the profoundness of ecstatic light. As I retired for sleep just a few hours before, I didn't know whether I would meet with several uncouth barricades, or whether I would teach the finishing line of sweet success, or whether I would reach the finishing line of sweet success like the flight of a royally unbridled eagle. As I tread on the jagged road outside, I didn't know whether the very next person I would encounter would be a long lost friend or a complete stranger with whom I would have to interact from the infinitesimal scratch so that we became best friends. I didn't know whether the waves of the ocean would serenely undulate under the opalescent moon, or whether there would be an undivided wall of fiery water called tsunami hurtling towards a crowded township. As I merrily hummed the tunes of my choice, snuggled cozily in my hotel room, I didn't know whether there would be impeccable landscapes of ice as I traversed up the hills, or whether what would greet me would be treacherous barren slopes with delightful rivulets of water tumbling by my side. I didn't know whether the colossal edifice would retain its poise or come down crumbling like a pack of frigid matchsticks as the earthquake struck without the tiniest of insinuation and with insurmountable might. I didn't know whether the bus awkwardly wobbling through the hills would reach the summit with all passengers in bliss, or whether it would skid its way head on down into the stillness of the devouring gorge. Devouring gorge. I didn't know whether the tantalizing plain of mud that laid in front would facilitate to reach the other end like a royal safari, or whether it would perseveringly suck life trying to traverse being the slippery sand. I didn't know whether the fresh bundle of life soon about to leave the womb and entire planet divine, whether the fresh bundle of life soon about to leave the womb and entire planet divine would be an unequivocally bonding baby girl or a mischievous little darling baby boy. I didn't know whether the stranger walking abreast my window lived in a charmed castle of glittering columns and crowns, or whether he found solace under the open roof of the unassailable sky when night inevitably descended by. I didn't know whether the bird perched on the roof would choose to peck at grains strewn in bountiful abundance around, or whether it would dabble its beak just an insouciant trifle into the few droplets of water in the bowl. I didn't know whether the offsprings would abruptly leave their mother one day, or whether they would all continue to exist till destined in their abode, replenished with the threads of love. I didn't know whether the bride and bridegroom who appeared so wondrously enlightened on solemnization of marriage would lead a life further of unhindered joy, mutual bliss and respect, or whether their existence would mark a new chapter of being fraught with total discontent, dissimilarities and disparities. I didn't know whether the flamboyantly roaring lion would attack the man with savage hostility, or would come near him to timidly lap up his palm. The same man who had once upon a time removed a thorn from its profusely oozing wound. I didn't know whether the vultures would admire their unfettered flight in the scintillatingly candid mirror, or whether they would disintegrate the same into worthless pieces with nonchalant probes of their legs and beaks. I didn't know whether the inscrutably exuberant paintings of the painter would reach him, the epitome of mortal success and fame, or whether he would spend a life in lambasted reclusion and seclusion from the outside world. I didn't know whether the kite I flew from my terrace would soar placidly. I didn't know whether the kite I flew from my terrace would soar placidly as I relished plucking at its lifeless strings. As I relished plucking at its lifeless string, or whether it would fall with an instantaneous thud upon obdurate concrete, cut by a counterpart string which had more luck that time. But irrespective of this or that, we did not know. What I and every single one of us living beings definitely and irrefutably know is that every mortal life taken birth upon the soil by God's grace is destined to be dead when God wants. But irrespective of this or that, we did not know. What I and every single one of us living beings definitely and irrefutably know is that every mortal life taken birth upon the soil by God's grace, that every mortal life taken birth upon the soil by God's grace is destined to be dead when God wants. Is destined to be dead when God wants. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall now give you a recitation of my poem titled Life is as Omnipotent as God. So here is a recitation of my poem from this book of mine. Life is as sweet as a chocolate, go and greedily crunch it. Life is as ravishing as the choppy ocean, go and swim in it. Life is as dense as the deciduous forest, go and voraciously philander in it. Life is as perspicuous as the scintillating mirror, go and sight your reflection in it. Life is as green as the sprawling grasses, go and exuberantly roll in it. Life is as impeccable as frosty cow's milk, go and perseveringly gulp it. Life is as fragrant as the mesmerizing scarlet rose, go and smell it. Life is as warm as the cozy quilt, go and comfortably snuggle in it. Life is as voluptuous as brown chunks of mud, go and ebulliently plow it. Life is as vivid as the rainbow in the cosmos. Life is as vivid as the rainbow in the cosmos, go and surreptitiously perceive it. Life is as surreal as blissful heaven, go and inexorably fantasize about it. Life is as contemporary as the swanky car, go and drive it. Life is as slippery as the slimy oyster shells. Life is as slippery as the slimy oyster shells, go and intensely feel it. Life is as thorny as the gigantic cactus, go and prick it. Life is as poignant as green chili, go and tenaciously chew it. Life is as heavy as the mammoth boulder, Go and skillfully hoist it. Life is as strong as the formidable fortress. Life is as strong as the formidable fortress wall. Go and wrestle with it. Life is as grandiloquent as the bombastic palace. Go and languish in it. Life is as brilliant as the dazzling sun. Go and bask directly beneath it. Go and bask directly beneath it. Life is as dark as a cloistered well. Go and dip your persona in it. Life is as enchanting as a placid moon. Go and profoundly admire it. Life is as blistering as the scorching deserts. Go and run unrelentingly in it. Life is as beautiful as the dainty fairy. Go and gently caress it. Life is as incredulous as the conventional aircraft. Go and fly high in it. Life is as comic as the circus clown. Go and tumultuously laugh with it. Life is as steep as the lanky mountain. Go and adroitly clamber it. Life is as tingling as the gushing mountain stream. Go and uninhibitedly bathe in it. Life is as intricate as the mother's womb. Go and worship it. Life is as horrendous as the swirling whirlpool. Go and audaciously confront it. Life is as enigmatic as the meticulously spun spider's web. Go and entangle it. Life is as simple as a line drawn on the floor. Go and vigorously enjoy it. Life is as savage as a sword. Go and fight valiantly with it. Life is as vibrant as the majestic peacock, spreading its feathers. Life is as vibrant as the majestic peacock spreading its feathers. Go and supremely relish it. Life is as romantic as the person you care for. Go and incorrigibly love it. Life is as sacrosanct as the omnipotent Creator. Go and wholesomely lead it. Life is as sacrosanct as the omnipotent. Life is as sacrosanct as the omnipotent Creator. Go and wholesomely lead it. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall now give you a recitation of my poem titled Never Live in Death, Never Die in Life. So here is a recitation of this poem of mine. There was simply no happiness in inexplicably venomous sadness, and there was simply not the tiniest trace of sadness in the heavens of jubilantly poignant and resplendently enamoring happiness. There was simply no daylight in morosely sadistic blackness, and there was simply not the tiniest trace of blackness in the sun of optimistically unfettered and spellbindingly perennial daylight. There was simply no faith in treacherously slandering infidelity, and there was simply not the tiniest trace of infidelity in the skies of unendingly unconquerable and compassionately everlasting faith. There was simply no truth in deplorably sacrilegious lies, and there was simply not the tiniest trace of lies in the utopia of eternally sacrosanct and unflinchingly peerless truth. There was simply no melody in venomously discordant deliriousness, and there was simply not the tiniest trace of deliriousness in the caverns of ecstatically unbelievable and vivaciously exuberant melody. There was simply no humanity in indiscriminately devastating war, and there was simply not the tiniest trace of war in the bloodstreams of pricelessly unassailable and fearlessly omnipotent humanity. There was simply no nature in preposterously robotic monotony. And there was simply not the tiniest trace of monotony in the lap of divinely effervescent and rhapsodically exultating nature. There was simply no open-heartedness in lecherously ominous manipulation. And there was simply not the tiniest trace of manipulation in the reign of torrentially unfettered and beautifully panoramic open-heartedness. There was simply no innocence in licentiously demented adultery. And there was simply not the tiniest trace of adultery in the womb of impregnably divinely and interminably fructifying innocence. There was simply no love in demonically pulverizing terrorism. And there was simply not the tiniest trace of terrorism in the heart of immortally burgeoning and ubiquitously evolving love. There was simply no simplicity in despicably marauding prejudice. And there was simply not the tiniest trace of prejudice in the cradle of everlastingly bountiful and victoriously undaunted simplicity. There was simply no compassion in mercilessly despondent indifference. And there was simply not the tiniest trace of indifference in the clouds of timelessly bestowing and unconquerably embracing compassion. There was simply no fire in nonchalantly decrepit nothingness. And there was simply not the tiniest trace of nothingness in the isles of passionately rejuvenating and royally untamed fire. There was simply no brotherhood in tyrannically meaningless selfishness. And there was simply not the tiniest trace of selfishness in the paradise of bounteously ebullient and amiably transcending brotherhood. There was simply no freshness in egregiously wanton stagnation. And there was simply not the tiniest trace of stagnation in the rainbow of unlimitedly triumphant and mellifluously astounding freshness. There was simply no transparency in cadaverously confiscating politics. And there was simply not the tiniest trace of politics in the mirror of candidly discerning and righteously radiating transparency. There was simply no freedom in profanely bigoted incarceration. And there was simply not the tiniest trace of incarceration in the midst of limitlessly bewitching and undauntedly priceless freedom. There was simply no life in satanically worthless death. And there was simply not the tiniest trace of death in the throne of perpetually winning and omnipresently undefeated life. Therefore I say, do not think the slightest of life after you are crucified to ghastly death, and never ever even utter the word death, whilst profoundly relishing and effulgently romancing, proliferating, gyrating, and adventuring in the immortal entrenchment of life. Therefore I say, do not think the slightest of life after you are crucified to ghastly death, and never ever even utter the word death, whilst profoundly relishing and effulgently romancing, proliferating, gyrating, and adventuring in the immortal entrenchment of life. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall now give you a recitation of my poem titled Life's the Way You See It. So here is a recitation of this poem of mine from this book of mine. For some, it was a garden of bountifully mesmerizing roses. while some could only indefatigably witness the acrimoniously pugnacious thorns. For some, it was a surreally rhapsodic cloud showering perennial enchantment, while some could only relentlessly feel penalized by the shades of gruesomely pulverizing black. For some, it was a forest of panoramically evergreen vivaciousness, while some could only fretfully rebuke the while some could only fretfully rebuke the enigmatically inexplicable, while some could only fretfully rebuke the enigmatically inexplicable travels and trails. For some, it was an ocean of unsurpassably unassailable happiness, while some could only unrelentingly blame the maliciously lambasting maelstrom of pernicious waves. For some, it was an unflinching fortress of timelessly blissful solidarity, while some could only implacably feel the disparagingly deteriorating abrasions with the inevitably unstoppable unfurling of time. For some, it was a tantalizingly celestial nightingale, while some could only dogmatically curse the inconspicuous pinches of harmlessly holistic adulteration in the air. For some, it was a meadow of eternally priceless peace, while some could only incorrigibly experience the frigid chunks of obnoxiously threadbare dirt. For some, it was a fireball of insupportably untamed passion, while some could only intractably feel outlandishly intimidated by the wisps of hideously black smoke that disastrously obfuscated their vision. For some, it was an ebulliently fathomless book of unendingly euphoric adventure, while some could only tirelessly feel asphyxiated by the sheer and inexplicably unfurling volume. For some, it was a bountifully persevering ladder to eternal success, while some could only intransigently castigate the unfathomable array of steep stairs. For some, it was an unbelievable rainbow of heavenly versatility, while some could only ruthlessly feel the incomprehensibly endless festoon of harsh shades. For some, it was an omnipotent sun. For some, it was an omnipotent sun of invincibly righteous hope, while some could only acrimoniously feel the boundlessly austere rays left, right, and spurious center. For some, it was a iridescently twinkling star of unprecedented optimism. For some, it was a iridescently twinkling star of unprecedented optimism, while some could only remorsefully feel the infinitesimally uncanny flicker, inflamingly imperil their sanctimonious existence. For some, it was an immortally patriotic march towards glorious martyrdom, while some could only grievingly feel the blood-soaked sacrifices in the triumphant Odyssey in between. For some, it was an unshakably sacrosanct mother who timelessly proliferate God's omnipresent chapter of survival. Unshakably sacrosanct mother who timelessly proliferate God's omnipresent chapter of survival, while some could only preposterously feel the savage waves of bedlam labor pain in between. For some, it was the most blessed icing on even the most diminutive little thing that they had achieved, while some could only relentlessly shiver, while some could only relentlessly shiver to the winds of rejuvenating coolness. Oh yes, for some it was an indomitably victorious inferno. Oh yes, for some it was an indomitably victorious inferno of passionately loving heartbeats. Loving heartbeats, while some could only limitlessly grouse the reverberating sound, while some could only limitlessly grouse the reverberating sound, ignominiously admonishing it for bringing cacophony in their dwindling stride. Because although the omniscient Creator had bestowed it in the most holistically unconquerable of forms upon every organism symbiotically alike, life's the way you choose it to be, life's the way you make of it, life's the way you believe it to be, life's the way you see it. Because although the omniscient Creator had bestowed it in the most holistically unconquerable of forms upon every organism symbiotically alike, life's the way you choose it to be, life's the way you make of it, life's the way you believe it to be, life's the way you see it. Ladies and gentlemen, it truly was a victorious privilege for me to have given a recitation of this poetry of mine to your impeccably exuberant jurisdiction. From the innermost realm of my soul, I thank you for having patronized my poetry. At any juncture of victorious existence, you can purchase this book of mine from Amazon.com. Thank you for listening to me.